There's a man sitting at the head of a long dinner table right now. Beautiful house, imported wine, a company worth $53 million, and he is absolutely certain he just put me in my place. He laughed at me in front of his entire family, called what I had to say a little hobby opinion. His son, my husband, looked down at his plate and didn't say a word. What none of them knew was that I had sent one text message from the guest bathroom 11 minutes earlier. And by the time the dessert forks came out, their whole empire was already falling.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The thing about the Aldridge family is that they never had to be mean to you outright. They were too polished for that. Gerald Aldridge had been doing business in Atlanta for 30 years. His wife Elaine had chaired the Lynx chapter. Their son Marcus had gone to Morehouse, their daughter Camille to Spelman, and their youngest, Devin, to Georgetown. They were old money, not inherited from slavery reparations old money. The other kind, built on commercial real estate and community bank connections, and being the right kind of black family at the right kind of dinners. The kind of family that smiled at you and still made you feel the temperature drop when you walked into the room. I had been walking into that temperature drop every Sunday for 6 years. Tonight was different, though. I had come with something. I had spent 3 weeks preparing it. Printed pages, highlighted sections, financial projections laid out in plain language because I didn't want to talk over anyone. I wanted them to understand. I had found something serious in their numbers, a collapsing Dallas acquisition buried under accounting tricks that would not hold past the second quarter. I was trying to help them. That was the honest truth of it. I waited until Gerald finished his story about some development deal he had won in Buckhead. I waited until Elaine refilled her water glass. Then I said, as calmly as I knew how, I've been looking at the Aldridge Group's quarterly numbers, and I think there's something we need to talk about. The table went quiet in that specific way tables go quiet when someone has said something everyone else already decided was beneath consideration. Gerald looked at me the way a professor looks at a student who has asked a question in the wrong class. He said, "Renee, sweetheart, we have people who handle our books." I said I understood that. I said I had seen some leverage ratios that concerned me. I said I just wanted to lay it out, just 10 minutes, so everyone was looking at the same picture. That's when he laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. That almost would have been easier. It was an amused laugh. The kind that means the person laughing doesn't think you're worth being cruel to. He looked around the table like he was sharing a private joke with everyone who already knew the punchline. "I appreciate the enthusiasm," he said, "but our family's been building real assets since before you were born. We don't need hobby-level analysis at the dinner table." Camille pressed her lips together. Devin reached for his phone. Elaine looked at her plate and said nothing. And Marcus, who had kissed me that morning. Marcus, who had said "I love you" in the parking garage outside my office 4 times in the last week. Marcus looked at the tablecloth and picked up his fork. I looked at him for 5 full seconds. Then I said, "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." Nobody moved to stop me. The guest bathroom in the Aldridge house had a heated marble floor and hand towels no one was supposed to actually use. I knew this because Elaine had mentioned it. Gently, the 3rd time I reached for one. I sat on the edge of the tub, pulled out my phone. I had Cynthia's number open before I even sat down. Cynthia Marsh had been managing my private fund for 4 years. She was 52, had worked in institutional finance since before I finished undergrad, and she did not panic. I needed someone who did not panic. I typed, "Execute full withdrawal from Aldridge Group, all facilities, tonight, 3 dots. Then, that's $39 million across 6 positions. Cross-default clauses trigger on contact. They're looking at $60+ million in immediate obligations with maybe 8 in liquid. You sure?" I looked at the door. I could hear Marcus laughing at something Devin had said. The familiar sound of the family running on rails, smooth and practiced. The way a dinner table sounds when everyone in the room already knows their part. I typed, "I'm sure," and Cynthia, "Make sure Gerald gets the notifications directly. I want his phone to ring tonight." Understood. Give it 12 minutes. I put my phone in my pocket, smoothed my dress in the mirror, and walked back to the dining room. The salmon had gone cold. I cut into it anyway. Devin was telling a story about something that happened at a conference in Dubai. Camille was scrolling her phone under the table, which was something she did when she thought no one was looking. Elaine was watching Gerald the way wives watch husbands when they're deciding whether a conversation is worth having later. Marcus glanced at me when I sat back down. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just needed a minute." He nodded and turned back to his brother. That was the tell, right there. Not the not asking, the not noticing. We had been married for 5 years. 5 years of Sunday dinners in this house. 5 years of me getting quieter and him not registering the silence. And in that moment, I watched him turn back to Devin's story, and I understood something that I had been not understanding for a long time. He wasn't choosing his family over me. He didn't see there was a choice. I ate my salmon. I counted down in my head, 9 minutes. The tablecloth was cream-colored Irish linen. I had learned that at the third dinner, when I set my glass down in the wrong place, and Elaine mentioned, with that particular softness, that linen marked easily, 8 minutes. Gerald was explaining to Devin why the younger generation didn't understand the patience required to build generational wealth. I thought about the presentation I had brought tonight. The pages were still in my bag. Leverage ratios, debt coverage gaps, a Dallas acquisition with a bridge loan coming due in 4 months and no liquidity to cover it. He had called it hobby-level analysis, 7 minutes. The call came at 7 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I was watching the clock on the range hood in the kitchen, just visible from where I was sitting. Gerald's phone buzzed on the table beside his bread plate. He glanced at it, frowned, silenced it. It buzzed again. He looked at the screen and his expression changed in a way that was almost interesting to watch. Something behind his eyes shifted. "I need to take this," he said. He stood, walked toward the hallway. I heard him say, "This better be important, Lawrence." Then his voice dropped. Then it got louder. Elaine's hand stopped moving toward her wine glass. Camille looked up from her phone. I cut a piece of salmon and chewed it slowly and didn't look at anyone. "What do you mean, withdrawn?" Gerald's voice came from the hallway. "All of it? When?" Marcus was frowning now, looking toward the hallway. "That's $39 million, Lawrence. You're telling me tonight? Right now?" Devin set down his fork. Gerald appeared in the doorway. He was holding his phone against his chest. His face had gone a color I had never seen on it before. Something beneath the polish, something raw and frightened. "Aldridge Capital pulled their credit facility," he said. His voice was working hard to stay level. 39 million. Effective immediately. The room exploded in the quiet, controlled way old money rooms explode. Which is to say, nobody raised their voice, but everyone started talking at once, and underneath the talking was the sound of a floor opening up. "Camille, that's our Dallas bridge loan." Devin, "Without that facility, we can't." Elaine, "Gerald, who E?" Gerald was scanning the room, looking for something, looking for an answer in the faces of his family, some explanation for why this was happening on a Sunday night at dinner. His eyes found mine. I don't know what he saw. I was just sitting there with my fork in my hand. But I watched the moment he started to put it together. I watched it move across his face like weather. "Who controls Aldridge Capital?" he said, slowly, very slowly. I set my fork down on the rim of my plate. The crystal base made a small sound against the china. "I do," I said. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without Vera Caldwell. I grew up in College Park, Southwest Atlanta, not the kind they film movies about. My mother worked the reception desk at a dental office Monday through Friday and cleaned 2 houses on Saturday. My father left when I was 7, which at the time felt like abandonment and later felt like a different kind of poverty. The kind that doesn't show up in your bank account but lives in how you learn to expect people to stay. We weren't broke. We were one unexpected bill away from broke. There's a difference, and if you grew up in it, you know exactly what I mean. I was good at math in a way that felt less like a gift and more like something I reached for because it was the one place where everything added up the way it was supposed to. By the time I was in 10th grade, I was doing our taxes, not because my mother asked me to, because I had started looking at our finances the way you look at something you might be able to fix. I got a full scholarship to Spelman, finance. Graduated second in my class with $42,000 in loan debt, which was less than most people I graduated with because I had been working part-time since sophomore year at a small investment advisory office in Midtown. That's where I met Vera. She came in looking for a second opinion on some estate documents. She was 68 years old, had made her money in commercial real estate development in the 70s and 80s when people told her every possible variation of no, and she wore it like someone who had long since stopped needing to be thanked for surviving. She sat across from my desk and said, "You actually read the documents before I came in?" I said yes. She said, "Most people smile and nod. You made notes." I showed her the notes. She asked me 3 questions. Financial questions that were not simple. I answered them. She nodded the way people nod when they were testing something, and the thing passed. 6 weeks later, she asked if I would manage her private portfolio, not the advisory firm, directly, her and me. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We worked together for 4 years. She taught me things that were not in any textbook, not because the textbooks didn't have the information, but because the textbooks assumed you were starting from a position of trust. Vera taught me about finance from the position of someone who was never automatically trusted, how to structure assets so they were visible only when you wanted them to be, how to hold leverage quietly, how to build a thing that looked small from the outside and was immovable from the inside. The most dangerous thing you can be, she told me once, is someone people decide not to take seriously. Don't fight that. Work inside it. I was 26. I thought I understood what she meant. I didn't. Not really. Not until much later. Vera died in October, 4 years after I met her. Ovarian cancer. She was 72, and she faced it the same way she faced everything, which is to say she made her arrangements, told the people who needed to know, and did not perform suffering for anyone's benefit. She left me $46 million, not to her children. She had 2, both of whom had spent years managing her expectations, not to charity, though there were charitable provisions, to me, structured in investment vehicles so layered that even the estate attorney said it would take a forensic accountant months to map all of it. She had built it specifically that way. She left me a letter, too, handwritten, 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph said, "You remind me of who I was before I wasted years trying to convince people I was worth their time. Don't do what I did. Let them underestimate you. Then let the work speak." I cried reading it. Not because I was grief-stricken, though I was. Because I still didn't fully understand what she was giving me permission to do. I kept the money quiet. I didn't tell my mother the full amount. I restructured the investment vehicles under a new name, Aldridge Capital, and kept building. Quietly. The way Vera had taught me. 2 years later, at a fundraising gala for a youth financial literacy nonprofit, I met Marcus Aldridge. He was charming, genuinely funny in the specific way that only works when someone isn't performing it. He asked what I did, and when I said private fund management, he asked follow-up questions that suggested he actually knew what private fund management meant. He did not ask what kind of car I drove. He did not ask who my family was. He did not seem to be assessing my usefulness. I thought that was rare. I gave him my number. I did not tell him about the money. I told myself it was because I wanted to know if the relationship was real first, and that was true. But if I'm being honest, really honest, the kind you only get to at 3 in the morning, it was also because Vera's voice was in my head saying, "Let them underestimate you," and I didn't yet know how to tell the difference between strategic patience and hiding. The wedding was beautiful. Outdoor ceremony at a property Marcus's family owned in Lithonia, white chairs, Spanish moss, a string quartet. My mother cried. My cousin Adele was my maid of honor and kept squeezing my hand and whispering, "You look so good, girl. You look so good." Gerald gave a toast that was almost entirely about the Aldridge legacy. Elaine told me when she kissed my cheek that she hoped I understood what it meant to be part of a family like theirs. She said it kindly. That was the thing. It was always said kindly. Marcus and I spent the first year mostly happy. He was attentive in the ways that showed up easily. Dinner reservations, remembering things I mentioned in passing, being genuinely interested in my work. I thought we were building something real. Here's what I told myself about his family, that they were protective of their legacy and that I needed to earn my way in, that families like theirs had a process, that if I was patient and professional and showed my value without making anyone uncomfortable, eventually they would see me as one of them. I held on to that story for 6 years. What I should have noticed, and did notice if I'm being precise about it, was what happened when Gerald and Marcus were in the same room. Marcus was a different person. Not dramatically, not obviously. But there was a realignment, a subtle leaning toward. When Gerald told a story, Marcus laughed the way people laugh when they need approval, not the way he laughed at home with me when something was actually funny. When Gerald said something dismissive about a deal Marcus had worked on, Marcus agreed with him. When Gerald called my work cute at the second family dinner, Marcus said, "She's really smart, Dad," and then changed the subject. That's not the same as saying, "Dad, that was disrespectful." I told myself it was just family dynamics. I told myself he would find his footing. I told myself that some men need time to stand up to their fathers, and that didn't make them bad people, just people in process. I was wrong, but I was also right, and that was the complicated part. 18 months into the marriage, Cynthia flagged something in our quarterly portfolio review. She said, "Renee, we have a concentration issue. One borrower group is carrying 23% of our commercial lending book, and the debt service ratios are getting soft." She put the file on my desk. I looked at the borrower name on the cover page. Aldridge Group, LLC. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Pull everything. I want to see all 6 positions." Cynthia looked at me for a second. She knew my last name. She put it together. "Do you want me to—" "Pull it," I said. "Don't say anything to anyone. Not yet." She pulled it. The Aldridge Group had been borrowing from my fund for over 3 years, before we were married. The first loan had been structured through an intermediary firm in Charlotte, and I understood immediately why I hadn't caught it. I had been deliberately keeping my fund management and my personal life in separate compartments, and this had slipped through the gap between them. $39 million in 6 separate facilities, all of them financing commercial real estate in Atlanta and Dallas, all of them current on payment. For now. I went home that evening and Marcus was making dinner, and I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him, and I thought, he doesn't know. I almost said something. I actually opened my mouth. Then I thought about what Vera had said. Let the work speak. I said, "Smells good. What are you making?" He said, "Chicken and rice. Nothing fancy." I sat down at the island and watched him cook and said nothing about what I had found. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I needed time to think. I spent the next 4 months doing something I should not have had to do, which was conducting a quiet, thorough analysis of my own husband's family's business. What I found was this: the Aldridge Group's Dallas acquisition, a 60-unit mixed-use property they had purchased 18 months prior, was underperforming by 30% against projections. Gerald knew. He had not disclosed this to his outside board members. He had instead been using intercompany loans to service the Dallas debt, which created the appearance of solvency while quietly hollowing out the operating reserves of 2 Atlanta properties. He was buying time. He was hoping the Dallas property would turn around before anyone looked too closely. It was not going to turn around. I sat with all of this for 2 months. I kept waiting for the right moment to raise it. I told myself I would bring it up after the holidays, then after Marcus's birthday. Then I thought maybe I should tell Marcus first, give him the chance to say something to his father himself. Here is what I learned in month 5. I had left a file on my home office desk, not the full analysis, just some preliminary notes with Aldridge Group at the top. Marcus came into the office to get something while I was on a call in the living room. Later that week, Gerald mentioned to Marcus that the Dallas property was being monitored closely. That exact phrasing. Within days of Marcus being in my office, Marcus had told his father that I was looking at their books. He had not told me that he'd done it. I found out because Elaine said something at dinner, offhand, about how it was sweet that I took an interest in the family business. The way she said sweet. The way she smiled. I sat very still and finished my soup and thought about what it meant that my husband had seen something on my desk and his first call was to his father, not to me. Let me tell you about 6 years of Sunday dinners. Let me tell you about the way Elaine asked, at dinner number 4, whether I grew up going to church. I said yes. She said, "Which denomination?" I said Baptist. She smiled and said, "Oh, we're AME. Gerald's family has been AME for generations." Just that. Just letting me know where the line was. Let me tell you about Devin asking me, at dinner number 11, "What does your family do?" And me saying my mother worked in healthcare administration, and him nodding that slow nod that means the answer was exactly what he expected. Let me tell you about Camille saying, at dinner number 20-something, that my earrings were interesting. Just interesting, not in a complimentary way. Let me tell you about bringing a peach cobbler to dinner number 30, my grandmother's recipe, the one I had been making since I was 9 years old, and Elaine saying, "How sweet. I'll have the staff put this in the kitchen," and it never appearing on the table. Let me tell you about the dinners where I offered an opinion about commercial real estate, my actual expertise, the thing I did every day. And Gerald would say, and then ask Marcus the same question as if I hadn't spoken. Let me tell you about Marcus every single time, choosing to be somewhere else in the conversation. None of it was violent. None of it was even particularly rude on its face. It was just 6 years of being given the clear and consistent message that I was in the room, but not of it. That I had been granted access, but not belonging. That they would tolerate my presence as long as I understood what my presence was. The night of the last dinner, I had come with my presentation because I think some part of me was still trying to prove something, still trying to earn the thing they had already decided not to give me. When Gerald laughed and said hobby-level analysis, it wasn't the laugh that broke it. It was Marcus picking up his fork. The guest bathroom was the same as it always was. Heated floor, perfect towels, nothing you were meant to actually touch. I sat on the edge of the tub and I texted Cynthia and I watched the 3 dots appear and I felt nothing that I would have predicted. No shaking, no tears. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me more than anything else had that night. Cynthia confirmed. 12 minutes. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a green wrap dress I had bought at a boutique in Inman Park. I had thought about wearing something nicer and decided against it. I had thought about wearing something plainer and decided against that too. I had put on the green dress and gold earrings and I had told myself, just be yourself. Just show up as yourself. I had been showing up as myself for 6 years, and it hadn't mattered. But I kept doing it anyway because the alternative was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and I had watched what that looked like. I had watched it happen slowly to Marcus. I smoothed my dress, walked back to the table, counted down. I will keep this part simple because it was actually simple, even though it felt enormous. Gerald's phone rang. He took it in the hallway. His CFO told him what had happened. He came back to the doorway with that look on his face. He announced that Aldridge Capital had pulled their credit facility. $39 million, immediate effect. And then he looked at me. I think he was hoping I would look confused or surprised or frightened. I was eating salmon. "Who controls Aldridge Capital?" he asked. The room had gone completely still. "I do," I said. "Have for 6 years." There are various kinds of silence. This one had a texture to it, like cloth pulled tight. Elaine said, "Renee?" "Just my name. Nothing else." Camille looked at her father. Devin looked at his phone, then put it face down. Marcus was staring at me. I looked back at him. I kept my face quiet. I wanted him to understand that I had not done this out of rage. I had done it because I had run out of other options, and because $39 million of my money was propping up a company run by a man who had laughed at me over salmon on a Sunday night. Gerald said, "You've been holding our debt this whole time." 6 positions, I said. 3 years. Before we were married, actually. I didn't know until 18 months in. Then why? He stopped, collected himself. Tried again. "You said nothing." "I tried to say something tonight. You called it hobby-level analysis." The room did not erupt. That's not how this family operated. What happened instead was a quiet, gathering stillness, like a house before a storm, where everything gets very still and very heavy, and you know something is coming even though nothing has moved. I reached into my bag and set my house key on the table beside my plate. The key to the main house where Marcus and I lived, the one Gerald had bought for us as a wedding present, the one Elaine had decorated. I picked up my purse. "You have about 40 minutes before your emergency board call," I said. "I'd get started." I walked out. I had kept my apartment in East Atlanta the whole time. Marcus had questioned it twice, and I had said it was for work, a quiet space, and that was partially true. The whole truth was that it was mine. Paid for before I ever met him, decorated with furniture I had chosen because I liked it, and not because it photographed well, with a kitchen that had a cracked tile on the backsplash I had never gotten around to replacing and never felt guilty about. I unlocked the door at 11:47, dropped my bag on the couch, stood in the middle of the room. My phone had started ringing before I reached the end of the Aldridge driveway. Marcus first, then Gerald, then a number I didn't recognize that was probably a lawyer. I had turned it face down on the passenger seat and let it ring for the 40-minute drive home. Now it lit up on the couch cushion. Marcus. Marcus. Elaine. Marcus again. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The tile on the backsplash was still cracked. I had bumped the corner with a pot 2 years ago and the piece had come loose, and I had just never dealt with it. In the Aldridge house, something like that would have been repaired before anyone noticed it needed fixing. I made tea. Earl Grey, because my grandmother had always made Earl Grey, and I had picked it up from her without deciding to. I took it to the window, sat on the wide sill with my back against the frame and looked at the neighborhood, corner store, 2 guys talking by a car, someone's porch light on. My phone lit up again. I watched it go to voicemail. I thought, tomorrow I will call Diane and start the divorce process. I thought, tonight I am just going to sit here. I was not crying. I had expected to be crying. I had imagined this moment in various forms over the last 4 months, and in most of those imaginings, I was crying or shaking or somehow undone. But I just sat on the windowsill and drank tea that was still too hot and watched the corner store close for the night and felt, more than anything else, quiet. Like a noise that had been running under everything for 6 years had finally stopped. I woke up in my clothes, mascara on the pillow. My phone had 41 missed calls, and I looked at the number and then put it face down again. I showered, put on jeans and an old Spellman sweatshirt, the kind of thing I had never worn to the Aldridge house. Made coffee, stood at the window. The first call I made was to my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was careful in the way it gets when she is holding something. She said, "Baby, I've been watching the news since 6 this morning." I said, "Mama." She said, "Tell me you're safe first." Something moved in my chest. "I'm safe," I said. "I'm at my apartment." She said, "I know you kept that apartment. I always wondered why you needed it so bad." A pause. "I think I understand now." I told her everything, the whole thing. Vera, the money, the 6 years, what happened at dinner, what I had done. She listened without interrupting, which is not something my mother does naturally. She must have been working at it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me about the money, Renee, all this time?" "I was afraid you'd see me differently." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Baby, I am your mother. I see you when you're asleep on the couch drooling on a throw pillow. You think $46 million changes that?" "I don't know what I thought." "You thought you had to carry everything by yourself, same as you always did." She paused. "Did you do the right thing?" I thought about it. "I did the only thing I had left," I said. "I think that's the same." "Good enough for me," she said. "Just come eat. I made biscuits." The second call I made was to Diane Okonkwo, my attorney. Diane had been recommended to me by Vera, who had said simply, "If you ever need a lawyer for something personal, she's the one." That was the extent of the recommendation, and it had been enough. Diane answered like she'd been expecting it. She said, "I saw the news this morning. I figured it was a matter of when. I need to file for divorce. Come in this afternoon. Bring whatever financial documentation you have. Though knowing you have more than enough." I almost smiled. The third call I made was to Cynthia. She picked up before the first ring finished. "How are you?" she asked. "Strange," I said. "How bad is it over there?" She walked me through it. Emergency board meeting had started at 11:17 the night before. Gerald had pushed to delay the Chapter 11 filing and been overruled 5-1. The Dallas property was already in default. A journalist from the AJC had been calling since 7 that morning. "They're already trying to frame the story," Cynthia said. "One of their people told a business reporter that you pulled the investment as personal retaliation." "Of course they did." "What do you want to do?" I said, "Nothing yet. Let them talk." 4 days later, Gerald's attorneys sent a letter to Diane threatening to sue for tortious interference and breach of implied fiduciary duty. Diane read it to me on the phone with the tone of voice she uses when something is legally absurd but still going to cost time. "They have no case," she said. "You exercised contractual withdrawal rights. There was no fiduciary relationship. This is noise." "I know, but they're going to make it expensive noise. They're hoping you'll settle. Give them enough capital to restructure the Dallas position and make it go away." "I'm not doing that." "I know. I just need you to understand this could take a year." "I understand." The same afternoon, Cynthia called to tell me that Marcus had shown up at her office. He had found her name through a private investigator. He had offered her $2 million to get me on the phone and persuade me to reinvest just enough to stabilize their bridge loan position. Cynthia had told him that the offer was inappropriate, and if he came back, she would call building security. Then she'd called me. I said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "I'm sorry, Renee." I said, "Don't be. This is exactly who they are." Here is what I had not planned on. 5 days after I walked out of that house, a piece ran in a lifestyle blog that covered Atlanta's Black professional and social scene, the kind of publication that runs 40 under 40 lists and gala coverage. The piece was sourced from people close to the Aldridge family, and it said, among other things, that I had concealed my financial identity from Marcus in order to gain access to the family's network, that I had strategically married into the Aldridge name, and that my withdrawal of the credit facility was calculated revenge by a woman who was never truly welcomed into the family. I read it twice. The last part was true in its facts and false in its framing, which is actually the hardest kind of lie to fight because it looks so much like the truth if you only look at it from one direction. I had stayed deliberately quiet. My strategy had been silence and patience. But silence has a cost. It leaves the floor to whoever is willing to talk. And the Aldridges had always known how to talk. Diane called. They're trying to control the narrative before this hits the mainstream press. Do you want to respond? I sat with it. I had spent 6 years being invisible because I thought it was the smart play. I had not spoken at 100 Sunday dinners. I had not corrected the record when Devin made a comment about my car. I had not said a word when Elaine praised my cobbler to someone else's face and let it disappear into the kitchen. I was done calculating the cost of being heard. Set up something with one journalist, I said, someone who will actually read the documents. The interview was with a woman named Priya Mehta at a business publication that covered Atlanta finance and commercial real estate, not a gossip column, not a lifestyle blog, someone who would read a balance sheet. We met at a coffee shop in Decatur. I brought nothing except my phone. I didn't need the documents. I knew the numbers. Priya was direct. She asked me to walk her through the withdrawal. I said, Aldridge Capital, my fund, held $39 million in commercial lending across 6 positions with the Aldridge Group. Those were legitimate contractual positions with standard withdrawal provisions. I exercised those provisions. She said, your timing. You did this at a family dinner. I said, the timing was the result of their CEO laughing at my attempt to warn him about a structural problem in his balance sheet. I had tried to address the issue professionally. He called it hobby-level analysis in front of his family. I decided that evening that I had done enough. She said, the family is saying this was personal. I said, of course it was personal. I was married to his son. But being personal doesn't make it not financial. Both things can be true. Gerald Aldridge built a $53 million company on $39 million of my capital and never once bothered to ask why his primary creditor never sent a representative to a single meeting. If he had done basic due diligence on his own debt structure, he would have found me. He chose not to look because looking would have required him to take someone like me seriously. She asked if I wanted to comment on the claims that I had manipulated my way into the family. I said, I married their son because I loved him. I concealed my financial position because I wanted to know if I was being loved for who I was or what I had. What I learned over 6 years is that neither question ended up mattering because the family had already decided who I was before I ever walked through the door. I wasn't hiding from them. They just never looked. Priya printed it verbatim, with 6 paragraphs of supporting financial analysis. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday, it had been picked up by 3 regional business outlets and 1 national one. The comment section had a split that told me everything. Half the people thought I was ruthless, the other half thought I was brilliant, and both groups were arguing so loudly that the truth in the middle, that I was just a woman who had been dismissed for 6 years and finally stopped accepting it, was getting a little lost. I read the first 10 comments and closed the browser. Gerald's legal team went quiet for 2 weeks after that. The call came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the dinner. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Renee, said the voice. This is Patricia Aldridge, Gerald's sister. I had met Patricia maybe 6 times over 6 years. She lived in Charlotte, came to Atlanta occasionally, was quieter than anyone else in that family, and had always seemed mildly uncomfortable at the dinners, in a way I had noticed but never examined closely. I said, Patricia. She said, I'm not calling on Gerald's behalf. I want you to understand that I am calling because I owe you an apology. I sat down. She said, I knew. Not about your fund specifically, but I knew that my brother's books were not what he was telling people. I've known for 2 years. He asked me not to say anything. I have some investment in the company, and he used that. Used my stake to keep me quiet. She stopped. She said, I watched him dismiss you every time I was at that table, and I didn't say anything. Not because I agreed with him, but because challenging Gerald has always cost something in this family, and I didn't want to pay it. A pause. You paid it instead. I'm sorry for that. I did not know what to do with that apology for a moment. I said, "Thank you for calling." She said, "The information I have about the accounting, I've already given it to the bankruptcy trustees. I thought you should know. It confirms what you found." "I know," I said. "I know you know." A small, tired laugh. Gerald always underestimated women who were quiet, thought quiet meant obedient. I said, "Vera Caldwell used to say the same thing." A pause. "Who's Vera Caldwell?" "She was my mentor. She taught me everything that mattered." Patricia said, "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a while. The cracked tile was still there. I thought about what it cost Patricia to make that call, what it cost her to choose the truth over the comfort of staying in position. Gerald would find out eventually. There would be a price. She had paid it anyway. I thought about what Vera had said. Let the work speak, but also, sometimes, let the truth speak, even when it costs you something. He came to my apartment on a Wednesday night, 11 days after the divorce filing. I saw him through the peephole. He looked like he had slept in his car. He probably had. He was wearing a suit that had been good a week ago. I opened the door, but not the chain. He said, "Please, 10 minutes." Against everything sensible, I let him in. He stood in my living room looking around, and I watched his face do something complicated. He had been here maybe 4 times in 5 years of marriage. I had always had the sense that he didn't know what to do with it. A space that had nothing to do with his family, with his parents' money, with the world he'd grown up in. He said, "This is really nice. It's very you." I said nothing, waited. He sat down on the edge of the couch. He put his hands together between his knees. He said, "I told my father that if he wanted to blame someone for the company, he should look at his own balance sheet." I looked at him. He said, "He hasn't spoken to me since. I've been staying at Devon's. Devon asked me to leave after 4 days." A sound that was almost a laugh. "I'm at a Marriott in Midtown. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that I'm not here to save the company. That's done. I'm not here to ask you to reinvest. I'm here because—" He stopped, tried again. "I need to tell you that I saw you. I always saw you. I just kept choosing not to say so." I sat in the chair across from him. He said, "You asked me once what your mother's favorite flower was. I still don't know. You asked me that 4 weeks ago, and I still don't know." He looked up. "I knew my father's business partners' birthdays. I knew what car Camille wanted for Christmas. I knew every detail of the Dallas acquisition because my dad talked about it every Sunday. And I didn't know what your mother's favorite flower was because I was never paying attention to the right things." He was crying, quietly, just tears on his face, not making a sound about it. He said, "I should have defended you every time. The cobbler that disappeared, the earrings comment." The hobby-level analysis line, "Renee, I heard that, and I thought about saying something for about 3 seconds, and then I looked at my father's face, and I just let it go. I keep letting things go that I should have held." The room was very still. I said, "Why are you finally saying this?" He said, "Because I've lost everything that I thought mattered, and the only thing I'm actually sad about is you." I believed him. I also knew it didn't change anything. "Thank you," I said. "I mean that. I think that's the most honest you've been with me in years." "Does it?" "No," I said. "It doesn't change anything. I can't unlive 6 years. I can't unsit through those dinners. The damage isn't something you can apologize into being a smaller thing." He nodded. He already knew. He stood up, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. He said, "For what it's worth, Vera Caldwell sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. I didn't ask how he knew the name. Patricia, probably. She was, I said. He left. I sat in the dark for a long time after, not crying, not relieved, just sitting with the particular weight of a door finally closing cleanly instead of being slammed. The paperwork was ready on a Monday. I signed it at my kitchen table with Earl Grey going cold beside me, the same way Vera had always said major decisions should be made, quietly, at home, without anyone watching. The Vera Caldwell Fund, private foundation, $5 million in initial capital, with a mandate to provide direct investment and 6 months of hands-on mentorship to women entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds in the Southeast. No charity model, no grant applications 20 pages long, just capital and time, the two things nobody ever gave people like us without making us prove we deserved it first. The board was me, Cynthia, Diane, and 2 women I had met through Spelman, who had built businesses out of nothing and understood what the inside of that process actually looked like. The week after I signed, I got a voicemail from a woman named Kezia Simmons. She was 27. She had a business plan for a mobile financial literacy program. Workshops in community centers, laundromats, churches, places where people actually were rather than places they were supposed to go. She had been rejected by 14 investors. She had the numbers. She had the plan. She had a voice on that voicemail that sounded like someone who had been told no. So many times she had started to believe it was the permanent answer. I called her back within the hour. I said, "Tell me about your program." She talked for 35 minutes without stopping. I said, "How much were you asking for?" She said, $40,000 to start. I said, "I'm going to give you $250,000. And I want weekly calls for the first 6 months. I want to see your numbers, your metrics, your expansion plan. And when you're ready to go beyond Atlanta, I want to be the first call you make." Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you serious?" I said, "Kezia, I'm always serious about money." She laughed. It was a good laugh, the real kind. 3 months later, I stood on a stage at a women's finance conference in a hotel ballroom downtown. 300 women, most of them in their 20s and 30s, most of them wearing the particular expression of someone who is hungry and trying not to show it in a room full of people who might judge them for it. I recognized that expression. I had worn it for years. The organizer had asked me to talk about resilience, about turning adversity into opportunity, about my journey. I had been in the elevator on the way to the ballroom thinking about what I actually wanted to say. I stood at the podium and looked out at those faces, and I said, "I'm not going to give you the version of this story where everything worked out, because I was exceptional. I'm going to give you the version where everything worked out because I finally stopped performing for people who had already made up their minds about me." I told them about the dinners. Not all of them, just enough to make the texture of it clear. I told them about the cobbler that went into the kitchen and never came back. I told them about the laugh. I told them about the text message. I did not make it dramatic. I told it the way I might tell a friend over coffee. Not performing grief, not performing triumph, just telling what happened in the order it happened. Then I said, "People think the point of the story is that I pulled $39 million and watched a company collapse. That's not the point. The point is that I spent 6 years making myself smaller to fit into a space that was never going to expand for me. And the only thing I regret is that it took me 6 years to understand that their opinion of me was not the final word on my worth." I paused. Vera Caldwell told me something when I was 26 that I didn't fully understand until I was 34. She said, "Don't spend your life proving you belong. Just build something they can't ignore." The applause was real, and I didn't know what to do with it exactly, so I just stood there and let it happen. Afterward, a young woman came up to me. 24 or 25, she had the look of someone who had been counting how much she spent on the conference ticket. She said, "My boyfriend's family treats me the way you described. I've been telling myself I'm being too sensitive." I said, "You're not." she said. How did you know when it was time to leave? I thought about it. I said, when I realized that staying was costing me something I couldn't get back. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. I said, build something beautiful from what comes next. That's the whole instruction. I drove home along Ponce de Leon, took a detour I didn't plan, drove past the street where the Aldridge house was. The house had sold at bankruptcy auction 6 weeks prior. New owners, different cars in the driveway. Someone had planted flowers along the front walk in colors Elaine would never have chosen. It looked smaller than I remembered. I kept driving. My apartment was warm when I got in. The kettle was still warm from the morning. The cracked tile was still there, and I had decided recently that I was going to leave it. It was part of the apartment. It was part of how I knew the apartment was real. I made tea, sat at the window. Somewhere out there, Kezia Simmons was running a workshop in a community center in Bankhead. She had sent me a voice note that afternoon. 12 families. She had gotten 12 families to show up on a Tuesday evening to talk about banking and credit and the difference between a payday loan and a credit union. 12 families who had never heard it, explained in a room that felt like somewhere they were allowed to be. I played the voice note again. She said at the end, I keep thinking about what you said, about building something they can't ignore. I think I'm doing it. I think I'm actually doing it. I put my phone down. The city was loud outside. The corner store had a new sign. Someone's music came through the walls. The ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives, which is not an insult. Ordinary lives are the thing everything else is built on. I thought about Vera, about what she left me. Not just the money. The money was the easy part, relatively speaking, but the knowledge of what to do with it. The knowledge that invisibility was a choice she had made too often herself and had tried to spare me from making. I thought about Patricia, who had finally chosen the truth over the comfort of being in position. I thought about Marcus in a Marriott in Midtown, figuring out who he was without his father's approval to navigate by. I thought about Gerald, who had built a $53 million company and never once wondered what would happen if the woman he laughed at decided to stop being quiet. I opened my laptop. The Vera Caldwell Fund had 3 new applicants in my inbox. I opened the first one. A woman in Savannah with a catering company and a plan for expansion, and a story in the cover letter that started, I have been told no 11 times. I'm not stopping. I typed, tell me more. Some foundations are meant to fall. Some women are meant to build something better from what's left. I had built mine, and I had never been more visible or more free in my life.